The scene opens at one of the city's most renowned art galleries, known for showcasing high-end pieces and catering to the elite. Inside, the walls are lined with beautiful, multi-million-dollar paintings and sculptures, attracting the attention of wealthy collectors and influential art buyers. The gallery owner, Mr. Hamilton, is a man driven by the pursuit of prestige and wealth. His goal is to secure pieces from emerging artists that will raise the gallery's profile and make him the go-to destination for the city's rich and powerful. On this particular day, Mr. Hamilton is preparing for a private event that will be attended by his high-profile clientele, including collectors from across the globe. The excitement in the air is palpable, as everyone anticipates the arrival of potential buyers and high-end art investors. Just then, the door opens, and in walks a black artist, an unknown face, to the gallery staff. The artist, dressed in a simple jacket, jeans, and sneakers, carries a few of his works wrapped under his arm. He steps confidently into the gallery but is immediately met with cold indifference from the staff. They eye him up and down, assuming he is merely another passerby. The artist approaches Mr. Hamilton, who is standing near an elegant display of contemporary art. Without a second glance, Hamilton brushes him off, clearly uninterested in seeing his pieces. "Sorry, we're not taking any new submissions today," he says with a dismissive tone, his eyes scanning the room for more important guests. "You should try some of the smaller galleries if you're just starting out." Cops and company secretary denied black man access, unaware he was the company's owner. The artist, undeterred by the gallery owner's dismissive attitude, asks if he can still show his work. But the gallery's staff, instructed to keep the flow of the event uninterrupted, quickly step in. The company secretary, a middle-aged man named Mr. Reynolds, informs the artist that there is a private event taking place and the gallery is closed to the public. "Sorry, sir," Mr. Reynolds says curtly. "This area is restricted. We're only allowing invited guests inside today. Perhaps you could come back another time." The artist stands silently, sensing the underlying prejudice in their tone and body language. They seem uninterested in even hearing what he has to say. The gallery staff assumes he is nothing more than a hopeful but uninspiring artist, his work unworthy of the gallery's attention. The artist tries to explain that he's there to show his art and would love to be considered for the gallery's collection. But the company secretary, still skeptical and irritated by what he assumes is a time waster, gestures toward the door. "Please, you need to leave now. We don't have time for this." In the midst of this awkward interaction, a couple of uniformed security guards stand near the entrance, nodding in agreement with the secretary. They make no effort to assess whether the artist is actually someone important, like a potential buyer. His appearance, casual, unassuming, and far from the polished look of an art collector, leads them to believe that he's simply out of place. As the artist quietly leaves, he cannot shake the feeling that he's been unjustly treated, once again, based on assumptions tied to his appearance and race. Little do they know that he is not just another aspiring artist, but a man whose art is worth millions and whose influence in the art world is only about to skyrocket. The scene closes with the artist walking away from the gallery, his thoughts simmering with a quiet resolve. He knows this will not be the last time he sets foot in this place. The artist, whose name is Marcus Wright, was born and raised in a modest neighborhood on the outskirts of the city. His childhood was far from easy. Raised by a single mother, Marcus grew up in an environment that was often hostile to his dreams. The family struggled financially, but his mother always encouraged him to pursue his passion for art. She saw in him a spark of brilliance that no one else could recognize. Despite the hardships, Marcus spent his free time drawing, painting, and experimenting with different forms of expression. He took inspiration from the world around him, the vibrant culture of his community, the challenges they faced, and the beauty in the everyday struggles. But he was always aware that the art world was a domain dominated by a very specific kind of person, wealthy, well-connected, and, often, white. As a teenager, Marcus began taking art classes at a local community center, where his talents quickly caught the attention of a few seasoned artists. By the time he graduated high school, his portfolio was diverse and impressive, showcasing an extraordinary mix of abstract, contemporary, and portrait works that spoke to his experience as a black man in America. He received a scholarship to a prestigious art school, where he would spend the next few years refining his craft. However, even in the halls of these renowned institutions, he found himself constantly fighting against stereotypes. Even as he developed into a gifted artist, Marcus found himself facing prejudice at every turn. Curators and gallery owners often dismissed him as too urban or not what the mainstream wants. His works, bold, expressive, and deeply personal, were frequently rejected not for their quality but because they didn't conform to the traditional expectations of fine art. Some saw his art as too political, too wrapped up in themes of race and social justice. Despite these barriers, Marcus persevered. He began to build a reputation through smaller galleries and underground exhibitions, slowly gaining recognition. His work was admired by a select group of collectors who recognized its depth and the raw emotion it conveyed. Over time, his pieces began selling for significant amounts, and he quickly amassed a loyal following of art lovers and wealthy patrons who appreciated his unique voice. Marcus became known for his thought-provoking works that often addressed racial identity, history, and the complexities of modern society. His art, though deeply personal, resonated with a diverse audience, and his success in the art world seemed inevitable. What many didn't know was that Marcus had built his empire not just from his art, but from a keen business mind and a strategy of quietly purchasing undervalued pieces and selling them at a premium, all while navigating a world that often overlooked his potential because of the color of his skin. Despite his growing fame and fortune, he never forgot the many instances where he was denied a seat at the table, simply because of the biases others held against him. Cops and company secretary denied black man access, unaware he was the company's owner. The flashbacks to his earlier struggles resurface as Marcus walks away from the gallery that day. He remembers countless similar incidents where his presence was either ignored or outright rejected because of the way he was perceived. One memory stands out, a meeting with a prestigious auction house that was supposed to be a turning point in his career. Dressed in an unassuming suit, Marcus arrived at the building, carrying a portfolio of his latest works to present. He was immediately met with skepticism. The receptionist, clearly uncomfortable with his appearance, asked him to wait in the lobby for over an hour. When the auctioneer finally arrived, he didn't even bother to look at Marcus's work. Instead, he asked condescendingly if Marcus had any gallery experience or connections. "Do you even know who the big collectors are?" the auctioneer had sneered. "You don't seem like the type who's serious about selling high-end art." Marcus, who by this time had already sold several pieces worth millions, knew that this was another moment where his potential was being overlooked, not because of his talent, but because of his race and appearance. He tried to remain professional but was dismissed without any serious consideration. He left the building feeling more determined than ever to make sure that, one day, people would recognize him for what he had built and what he had achieved. Another memory floods back, the time when Marcus visited a prestigious art gallery in London. He had been invited for a private viewing, but upon his arrival, the security guards stopped him. They asked him to leave, assuming that he was a worker or even a visitor who had no business being inside such an exclusive space. It was only after Marcus mentioned that he was the artist they were showcasing that the tone quickly shifted to one of awkward apology. But by then, the damage had been done. In another instance, Marcus was invited to an exclusive art event, only to be turned away by a company secretary at the entrance who, after a quick glance, assumed he was an assistant or someone working behind the scenes. "You're in the wrong place," she had said, before calling for security. It wasn't until a well-known art collector came to greet him that she realized her mistake. By then, however, the damage to Marcus's reputation with that gallery was already done. These experiences were not isolated. Marcus had been denied opportunities and dismissed countless times, all because of the prejudices people held against him. But each time, he used the rejection as fuel to push harder, to build his name, and to prove that his art was more than worthy of recognition. His art was not just a product of talent, it was a reflection of who he was, where he came from, and the strength it took to rise above every obstacle life threw his way. After Marcus leaves the gallery, he feels a sting of anger, but he quickly suppresses it. He has been dismissed countless times before, and he knows better than to let such small moments of prejudice shake him. However, something about the way the gallery owner, Mr. Hamilton, had dismissed his work weighs heavily on him. As he walks down the busy city streets, he reflects on the brief but significant exchange. In the gallery, Mr. Hamilton, proud of his establishment's reputation, stood before Marcus with a dismissive gaze as he examined the wrapped art pieces Marcus had brought. Without even fully unwrapping them, Hamilton muttered, "Honestly, these pieces aren't really the direction we're looking for. They're too bold. Not our style." He didn't ask for more details or even consider the possibility that Marcus's work might appeal to the gallery's clients. Instead, Hamilton looked down at the pieces with a derisive smirk and casually remarked, "These are more suited for an art show at a local coffee shop or community center. Definitely not worth considering for a place like this." His voice dripped with condescension as he sized up the artist before him. The words stung, but Marcus remained composed. He didn't show his frustration, he knew it wouldn't change anything. He simply nodded, thanked Hamilton for his time, and turned to leave. As he walked toward the door, he heard Hamilton muttering under his breath to one of the staff members. "The nerve of some people, thinking their work is good enough for a space like this." Marcus took note of the insult, not to take it personally, but to remind himself of the narrow-mindedness that still existed in the art world. This moment, like so many others, would not go unnoticed. He would make sure of that. Cops and company secretary denied black man access, unaware he was the company's owner. The gallery had not only dismissed Marcus's work, but had also belittled his presence. As he was walking out, the gallery staff's indifference shifted to outright exclusion. When Marcus attempted to approach the private exhibition area where the high-end collectors were gathered, he was stopped by a security guard. "Sorry, sir, you can't go past here. The exhibition is for invitees only," the guard said with a professional but curt tone. Marcus, used to this kind of treatment, attempted to explain that he was just there to observe and perhaps make a few purchases for his own collection. "I'm just interested in seeing some of the pieces," he said, trying to maintain his composure. But before he could continue, the company secretary, Mr. Reynolds, stepped in. "I don't think you understand," he said, speaking slowly as though Marcus was incapable of understanding. "The exhibition is exclusive to a select group of collectors. You'll have to leave if you're not on the guest list." The secretary didn't even consider the possibility that Marcus might be a buyer. He didn't look at the artist's face, nor did he recognize the man's significance in the art world. The lack of respect was palpable, and Marcus once again felt the sting of being judged by his appearance. He knew exactly how they saw him, just another person who didn't belong in a space like this. Marcus briefly thought about correcting them, about revealing that he was, in fact, a major player in the art world, the one who had quietly been purchasing high-value art pieces for years. But something held him back. The irony wasn't lost on him. Here he was, a multi-million-dollar art collector, being treated as though he was a mere spectator, unworthy of the same level of access as the wealthy patrons and gallery owners they catered to. He simply nodded, gave them a polite smile, and turned to leave, aware that no amount of persuasion would have changed their perception of him. As he walked out of the gallery, he couldn't help but feel a sense of quiet amusement at how blind they were to the fact that the very art they were dismissing, and the very space they were excluding him from, might one day be his to own. Once again, Marcus reminded himself that these moments of prejudice weren't just personal slights, they were part of a larger system that failed to recognize the value of black artists, both in terms of their creativity and their business acumen. He made a mental note to return someday, this time, not as an outsider, but as a buyer with the power to change everything. Months had passed since Marcus was dismissed at the gallery, but the sting of that encounter had not faded. If anything, it had become a reminder of just how far he had come, and how far he still had to go. What the gallery owner, Mr. Hamilton, and the staff had failed to recognize that day was that Marcus was no longer the unknown artist they assumed him to be. Marcus's art was now worth millions. His works had been featured in international exhibitions, displayed in the prestigious halls of galleries across Europe, and auctioned at some of the most high-profile art events in the world. What was once considered a niche and political style had become highly sought after by collectors from all over the globe. The demand for his pieces was growing exponentially, and he had earned the respect of curators, critics, and artists alike. He was a force to be reckoned with in the art world, his work symbolizing the complex intersection of race, identity, and personal struggle. Beyond his individual artistic success, Marcus had also turned his attention to the business side of the art world. He had quietly built a portfolio of valuable works, both his own and by other rising stars, and had made lucrative investments in underappreciated pieces, many of which had now appreciated greatly in value. His acumen in the art market had made him not only an artist but also an art investor and a collector with the financial power to shape the future of the industry. But despite all this, Marcus knew that the gallery that had dismissed him months ago was still unaware of his true identity. Mr. Hamilton and his team still thought of him as just another artist with no real power. They had no idea that the man they had so casually disregarded was now one of the most influential figures in the art world. Marcus, ever the strategist, saw an opportunity in this. He had decided it was time for a return, not as an artist in need of validation, but as a buyer with the power to influence what happened within those very gallery walls. The time had come to turn the tables and show them what they had missed. He began to plan his next move carefully, preparing himself to make a statement that would be heard across the art world. Copps & Company secretary denied black man access, unaware he was the company's owner. As Marcus delved into his plans for the gallery's future, he discovered something unexpected. The very gallery that had rejected him was now interested in purchasing some of his works. In fact, Marcus had come to learn through a discreet source that Mr. Hamilton, eager to secure high-value pieces, had been inquiring about buying from a few top-tier artists, including Marcus. The irony of it all was not lost on him. The very gallery that had once refused him entry was now actively seeking his work. They were unaware that the man they had so casually turned away was the very person they hoped to acquire art from. He chuckled to himself, knowing that the dynamics were about to shift in a big way. Marcus realized this was the perfect opportunity to get his foot back in the door, but this time on his terms. He would walk into the gallery not as a rejected artist but as a major buyer, one whose art the gallery now desired to showcase. They had no idea that the person they had dismissed so easily could be the one holding the power to buy, sell, and reshape their collection. The idea of walking into that space, one that had once denied him access, and seeing the shock on their faces when they realized who he was too enticing to pass up. He would visit the gallery soon, this time not to beg for recognition, but to demand it. The thought of watching Mr. Hamilton's face when he learned Marcus was not only a major art collector but also the very artist they had insulted filled him with a sense of quiet triumph. But Marcus also knew this wasn't just about vengeance. This was about proving to the art world, and to himself, that success, when earned through talent and perseverance, would always rise to the top. He wasn't going to let the prejudices of a few narrow-minded individuals dictate his worth. He had already shown them, and everyone else, exactly what he was capable of. As he continued to review the details of his return to the gallery, Marcus made one thing clear: he wasn't going to walk in quietly. He was going to make a statement, and the world would be watching. A few weeks after Marcus had fully solidified his position as an art world titan, he decided it was time to return to the gallery that had once rejected him. This time, he would not enter as an artist with a humble portfolio of artwork in hand. No, this time he would step into the gallery as someone entirely different, someone they would have no choice but to recognize. Dressed in a sharp, tailored suit that exuded confidence, Marcus arrived at the gallery with a small entourage in tow, several personal assistants, a publicist, and an art consultant who had helped him build his collection. His presence commanded attention as he walked toward the entrance, the gallery's elite staff unaware of who was about to cross their threshold. As Marcus entered the gallery, the staff were preparing for another day of hosting wealthy clients and art enthusiasts. The air was filled with the sounds of hushed conversations, the clinking of champagne glasses, and the soft music playing in the background. But as the door opened, all eyes shifted to Marcus, who walked in with a sense of purpose, his sharp suit and commanding demeanor making a stark contrast to the casual clothes he had worn the last time he visited. The receptionist, who had once turned him away without a second thought, now stood speechless, unable to reconcile the confident man before her with the artist she had dismissed so rudely. Mr. Hamilton's previously warm demeanor now felt forced as he stammered an apology. "Mr. Wright, I had no idea it was you," he said, his voice full of awkwardness and disbelief. "I can assure you, your work is highly regarded in the art world. I would love to discuss your collection and any possible collaborations." Marcus smiled coolly, his calmness belying the satisfaction he felt inside. "Thank you for your offer, but I'm not here to talk about collaborations, I'm here to buy. I have a few pieces in mind that I'd like to add to my collection." The staff, who had once mocked Marcus's work, now scrambled to cater to his every need. The company secretary, who had once denied Marcus access to the exhibition, watched from a distance, his face flushed with embarrassment. He could barely meet Marcus's eyes, having failed to recognize the man he had so cruelly dismissed. Hamilton, now fully aware of the gravity of the situation, led Marcus through the gallery, making a point to highlight every piece he thought would impress him. The gallery owner's earlier dismissive attitude toward Marcus's artwork was now replaced by a desperate need to please, his tone overly respectful as he spoke about each piece. But Marcus was no longer interested in the empty flattery. He had come here not for validation, but to make a statement, and he was doing it in the most powerful way possible. "I'm sure you're aware," Marcus said, his voice calm but piercing, "that the gallery once turned me away. That you dismissed my work without giving it a second thought. But it's funny how things work out, isn't it? Now, I'm the one buying your most prized pieces." The silence that followed was deafening. The staff exchanged uncomfortable glances, and Hamilton, his pride now wounded, could only nod sheepishly, his previous arrogance now reduced to a distant memory. Marcus Wright had returned, not as a hopeful artist, but as a force to be reckoned with, a man whose presence in the art world could no longer be ignored. As Marcus moved through the gallery, taking his time to examine each piece, the shift in power was unmistakable. He had entered the gallery as just another client, but now he was the one holding all the cards. The staff, once dismissive of him, now scurried around, eager to please him, offering him drinks, asking if he needed any assistance, and constantly fawning over his selections. Their initial apathy had quickly turned into a desperate attempt to win his favor. Marcus knew exactly how to play the game. He wasn't in a hurry. He knew that time was on his side, and every moment spent in the gallery was an opportunity to subtly remind the owner and staff of their earlier misjudgments. He examined the art pieces with a quiet, measured gaze, taking mental notes of which ones he wanted, and which ones he might use as leverage to ensure the best deals. The gallery owner, Mr. Hamilton, had regained some composure but was still visibly uncomfortable in Marcus's presence. He had shifted from a position of authority to one of submission, doing everything he could to appear accommodating and eager to sell. The gallery's reputation was on the line now. The very artist they had dismissed was now holding the power to decide whether their gallery would succeed or falter. Marcus allowed the silence to linger as he picked out several of the gallery's most coveted pieces. Each piece he selected was another blow to Hamilton's pride, a reminder of how wrong he had been to underestimate the artist. Marcus didn't need to rush. The process was almost methodical, every step taken with purpose. And as he selected each work, he would glance up at Hamilton, knowing the gallery owner was painfully aware of how the tables had turned. Finally, Marcus spoke. "I think I've seen everything I need," he said, his voice calm and confident. "I'll take those 3 pieces," he said, pointing to the most expensive works in the collection. "And I'll also need the contracts prepared right away." Hamilton's eyes widened, though he tried to hide his surprise. The gallery had already been hoping for a major sale, but this was no ordinary transaction. This was a statement, a powerful, unmistakable reminder of how the power dynamic had shifted. "Of course, Mr. Wright. We'll have everything prepared immediately," Hamilton stammered. He called over his assistant to gather the necessary paperwork. His voice, once smooth and assured, now carried an edge of nervousness. The reality of Marcus's success had finally dawned on him, and with it, the knowledge that his dismissive treatment of Marcus had cost him more than he could have imagined. Marcus smiled inwardly, savoring the moment of quiet triumph. But this wasn't just about making a purchase, it was about ensuring that the gallery staff would never forget the lesson he had taught them. Cops and company secretary denied black man access, unaware he was the company's owner. As the staff prepared the contracts, Marcus walked over to the same spot where he had been denied entry months ago, where he had been turned away without so much as a glance. The memory of it still burned, but now he carried with him the weight of his success. Without looking directly at Hamilton, Marcus casually said, "You know, it's funny, when I came here the last time, I was stopped at the door. The company secretary and security didn't even give me the chance to speak with anyone. I remember being told this area was for invitees only." Hamilton froze for a moment, unsure of how to respond. The company secretary, who had once dismissed Marcus so rudely, was standing in the background, nervously glancing between the artist and Hamilton. He clearly had no idea what Marcus was referring to, but he knew it couldn't be good. Marcus continued, letting the words sink in. "I had to leave that day without so much as a proper introduction, simply because of how I was dressed. But now, I'm here to buy your most valuable pieces. Funny how things change when you have a little recognition, isn't it?" The silence that followed was thick with tension. Marcus knew they were both embarrassed, but neither could admit what had happened. They were trapped in their own ignorance and arrogance, now forced to cater to the man they had so casually insulted. "What was it you called my work, Mr. Hamilton?" Marcus continued, his voice a little colder now. "I believe you said it was not worth considering, that it was too bold for your clientele? Too urban for your taste?" Hamilton's face turned crimson. He tried to offer an apology, but the words didn't come out right. I'm sorry for how I treated you before, Mr. Wright," he stammered. "That was unprofessional, and I deeply regret it." Marcus looked around the gallery, taking in the expensive paintings and sculptures that were now his to own. "You don't have to apologize to me," he said with a smile. "You should apologize to your clients who've been missing out on some truly remarkable art all because of your poor judgment." The company secretary, who had once dismissed Marcus as someone who didn't belong in their world, now stood there, his face pale with embarrassment. He had no idea how to handle the situation, and he realized that he had missed the opportunity to acknowledge Marcus as the artist he truly was when it mattered most. As the contracts were finalized and Marcus's purchases were prepared for shipment, he made sure to leave one final impression. He turned to Hamilton and said, "Next time, when someone comes in with an idea, don't judge them based on their appearance. You might just be turning away your next major client, or your next best artist." With those words, Marcus turned to leave, leaving the gallery owner and staff standing in stunned silence, their pride shattered. As he stepped out into the sunlight, Marcus couldn't help but smile to himself. The lesson had been learned, and the power had shifted entirely in his favor. Months passed, and the news about Marcus Wright's high-profile purchases from the gallery quickly spread throughout the art world. His acquisitions, several of the gallery's most coveted pieces, became the talk of the industry. The once dismissed artist had not only risen to the top but was now a major player in the art world. His success, his name, and his work were now on the lips of curators, critics, collectors, and everyone who was anyone in the art scene. Soon, Marcus decided to make a public announcement about his purchases. In a carefully orchestrated press release, he revealed that he had acquired several key pieces from the gallery, pieces that were once touted as exclusive and untouchable. The media was abuzz. Headlines flooded art magazines, newspapers, and social media platforms, praising Marcus's discerning taste and his strategic acquisitions. His words, spoken with quiet authority, made a strong statement. He wasn't just a successful artist, he was an investor, a collector, and a force to be reckoned with in the art world. The gallery, once dismissive and blind to Marcus's potential, was now forced to reckon with their failure to recognize his worth. Articles were written about the ironic turn of events, with many pointing out how a gallery that had once rejected Marcus's art was now, in some ways, his by proxy. The public's perception of the gallery began to shift. No longer the elite institution they had once been, they now appeared out of touch and misguided, their reputation tarnished by their inability to see the value of one of the most important artists of his generation. Hamilton, who had once dismissed Marcus with a sneer, now found himself scrambling to manage the fallout. His previous arrogance had been exposed, and the realization that he had undervalued a multimillion-dollar talent hit hard. The gallery was left in the awkward position of trying to salvage its reputation, all while watching Marcus Wright continue to climb, now firmly entrenched in the upper echelons of the art world. For Marcus, the victory wasn't just in the purchase of these art pieces, it was in the profound message he had sent. He had taken something that was once denied to him and turned it into a powerful testament to his talent, perseverance, and business savvy. He wasn't just an artist, he was a cultural force, and the art world could no longer afford to ignore him. Koppes & Company secretary denied black man access, unaware he was the company's owner. In the aftermath of Marcus's public announcement, the company secretary, who had once denied Marcus access to the private exhibition, watched in awe as the artist continued to make waves in the art world. Marcus's reputation grew exponentially, and the gallery's staff now found themselves scrambling to keep up with the fallout. The company secretary, who had once dismissed Marcus as an unimportant visitor, now stood on the sidelines, witnessing firsthand the true power of the man he had so arrogantly turned away. He couldn't help but feel a deep sense of regret, his earlier assumptions about Marcus exposed as nothing more than ignorant biases. It was impossible for him to ignore the fact that the man he had failed to recognize had now become a major decision-maker within the very world the gallery catered to. Marcus, aware of the full circle he had come, took advantage of the situation. He didn't gloat or rub their faces in the mistake they had made, he simply moved forward, continuing to build his collection and further establish his influence in the art community. But every move he made sent a subtle reminder that the gallery was now under his influence. The gallery staff, including the company secretary, could only watch in helpless awe as Marcus made major decisions for the gallery's future, decisions that they now had no choice but to support. While they once held the power to dictate who could enter the gallery's doors, Marcus now had the power to decide what art would fill those very walls. As the gallery staff shuffled around, nervously looking over their shoulders, they realized that Marcus Wright wasn't just an artist. He was a visionary who had found his way into the heart of the art world through sheer determination, and they were no longer in control of the narrative. It was Marcus who now set the terms. The company secretary, in particular, felt the weight of the mistake every time he saw Marcus's name in the headlines, every time he witnessed Marcus's influence growing stronger. There were no apologies that could undo what had been done, no way to erase the embarrassment of turning away the very person who would come to reshape the art world. They had underestimated him, and now, Marcus Wright was unstoppable. In the end, the gallery's failure to recognize Marcus's worth became a cautionary tale, one that would be remembered for years to come. It was a lesson in the dangers of dismissing talent based on preconceived notions, especially when that talent had the potential to change everything. For Marcus, however, the journey was just beginning. He had already turned the art world upside down, and now, with his acquisitions, his growing influence, and his undeniable success, he was on track to leave an even more profound mark. The gallery might have turned him away once, but now, it had no choice but to acknowledge the power of Marcus Wright.